Whoa. Some crazy business here. Hang on 1 second. All right.
Whoa. 1935, the line in the NFL championship. The Detroit Tigers take the World Series. The Red Wings bring home Lord Stanley's Cup. Joe Louis begins his rise to world domination. This transforms the Motor City into Detroit, City of Champions.
All right, there you go. Anchors away. It is time for Detroit, City of Champions, the podcast. I'm Jamie Flanagan.
Charles Avison.
And just lots of stuff happening. And we just did an episode of the Man Cave Happy Hour in here. I had a bunch of people hanging out, and now we're moving on to Detroit, the City of Champions. And what's too loud? The music?
The
headphones?
Into the headphones.
Oh, you're good. And
All
I'm
right.
just shouting because I got a little bit of a cold, so I'm screaming.
okay.
That's why I think I'm screaming. But I think I had a cold because we were sitting in that cold factory all last week for 2 episodes.
That was a blast to go to do that.
It was the
man.
best.
It was so cool.
Ever. I think I enjoyed that more than when we were in the historical museum.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Totally. Roger was great.
Because I think Roger made it.
Totally. Roger
so
was.
much
I
better.
learned a ton, man.
Yep.
And having Miss America 10 in the background was like the coolest thing. Like
Literally just to reach behind you
Yeah,
and touch the
it was
boat that
right
we were
there.
talking about
Yeah.
as it was happening. It was so fun to do. But the Miss America story, Miss America 10, her story is not done.
No, we're just getting rolling on that.
We just got to drop her in the water. We're like looking at those engines and those 4 engines. And he's like talking about how he was laying on the floor and mapping it out. He goes, no, we'll put them end to end.
And they're like, you can't do that.
He
He goes,
goes-
you'd be like putting a bomb in an egg crate.
He goes, I'm the one strapping it to my
Yeah,
back.
I'm the
so
one that's got to do it.
I got to
It's-
drive it.
And I was thinking, I was putting the notes together for tonight's show. I was like, oh shoot, there's so many. There was a couple of just unbelievable quotes and like the genesis of the idea for the Miss America 10.
Right.
And I
I
was
love
like,
it.
should
I
we
love
revisit?
that.
Should I bring those quotes back for today just to make sure that whoever's listening to this show hears it? It's like we can't because we got even more awesome quotes and stuff to talk about tonight.
Right.
And so if you didn't listen to last week's show, you got to go back and listen to it because it's got some
Yes.
great stuff for like the genesis of the Miss America 10, like the reasons for it coming into being, the engines, all that stuff. One of the greatest hymns of praise, like poems ever, like J. Lee Barrett talking about like God of Vulcan, the Vulcan God of forged, created these engines and whatever. They're just like the greatest little poem. So we don't have time to talk about all that again. I would like I say, it's the coolest thing. So if you didn't listen to last week's show, you got to go back and listen to the genesis of the engine, of the boat, the idea and everything. But it's because we're moving right along today.
Yeah.
Episode 63, The Madman's Dream.
The Madman's Dream.
Yep. We've already kind of alluded to it last week when we said the Madman's Dream was the Miss America 10.
Yeah.
But
But
it's just such a cool title. I was like, I couldn't help it. I want to make sure everybody recognizes because that's what they called this boat.
Right.
The Miss America 10, the nickname of it was the Madman's Dream. And we talked about the genesis of it, like I say, last week and why it was called the Madman's Dream. But today it plays a central role. So that's why I wanted to make sure that the episode titles that. So,
Yeah. Well, he was like, you're going to blow yourself up. What are you doing?
yeah. So things are getting crazy. It's 1931 rolling into 1932.
All right.
And we talked about Miss England 2, Garwood Garwood in the previous year, 1931, had gotten beat in the first heat by the Miss England 2. This is the English, British are absolutely dedicated to bringing back the Harmsworth Trophy to England. And the Miss England 2 wins the first heat, which was like incredible to all this first race that Garwood had lost. And then the second heat, they rebuilt the boat and everything. And then Garwood ends up, there's engine problems for the Miss England 2 and Garwood. So, Garwood wins, but you know, it was like, you know, they had the Yankee, they called it the Yankee trick, which was kind of one of the things that gave rise to Garwood's nickname as the Gray Fox of the Algonac, which is where he like acted like he was going to beat K Don to the line, and K Don tried to catch up with him, and they both got disqualified, and Garwood's other bolt made it around the track. And so like there's, you know, so there's all kinds of things that are under the scenes, and they're like, you know, we had a better boat, you know, we should have won this race. You know, they had a year to sort of you know, be like, we got jobbed, if you know, to say like we didn't, you know, we're gonna beat them this next, you know, race. The next time we're challenging them again for sure. And they took a page out of Garwood's book, because the Miss America 9, the only reason it had any chance whatsoever against the superior Rolls-Royce engines, you know, the Rolls-Royce engines that they created for the Miss England 2, was that the Garwood had added superchargers to the two engines, and you know, added a little bit more juice. But it just the tail of the tape, you had the Miss England 2 had 3,600 horsepower. The Miss America 9 had 3,200. So it was, you know, it was not anywhere. It wasn't, I mean, it was somewhat close, but that was only maxing out the two engines. And so in 1932, the English are, you know, the Garwood sort of leads off the year in January with he takes the Miss America 9 across a measured mile in Florida. He takes it a couple times and he breaks the world record. He breaks the K-Don's world record.
Wow.
And so he takes the world record back. Garwood does, and then the English, they're learning their lesson from Garwood adding superchargers to his engines. They supercharged the engines for the Miss England 3, so now they've got a new boat, they've got new engines. I mean, it's the same basic engine, but they add superchargers, so they increase the Miss England 3 increases to 4,000 horsepower.
Oh boy,
which dwarfs the Miss America 9, which again is 3,200. So. That's when we were talking about all the stuff that went into creating the Miss America 10, which was Garwood knew he's not going into in 1932. He's not going into racing.
I'm not going to a gunfight with a knife.
Exactly.
Right?
And so that's what leads to this. He's saying, you know, to the madman's dream, which is like, they can't there's no increasing the amount, you know, like there's no more tweaking the engines to get any more juice out of
these
them.
two engines, you're maxed.
Yeah, we're maxed out. So the only thing to do is to tether them together and make one giant, you know, with 4 engines, and make 2 ridiculously huge engines that all function as one, you know, that have, you know, 2 completely different engines. And that's why it was the madman's dream, because you're tethering 2 engines together to create one super engine.
That's
like,
nuts.
I know, that's what they're like.
Well, it does it.
How do you tie these engines together?
Well, Garwood thought.
Yes, Garwood thought of it.
Thought it would work, but who would, you know, it does sound dangerous.
Yes, because the main danger part is the tethering of the engines to get them to function as one. And that's the rod that goes in between them, that when the thing's firing, like, I'm not the biggest, you know, knowledgeable about engines, but in order, you know, the main drive shaft that pumps it all has got to be functioning as one thing. And that's really the core component. That's the strength of the entire engine, because if you got that much muscle turning that rod, that rod's got to be made of like adamantium steel, like, you know, Wolverine's claws, in order so it doesn't rip apart. And that was good. As we're going to see, that's going to be what turns out to be one of the biggest issues. Anyways, the Miss America 9, Garwood sets the record, and then the Miss England 3 with these new supercharged Rolls-Royce engines shortly thereafter in February in Loch Lomond, Scotland, it goes from 111 miles an hour, which is Garwood's record, to 119 miles an hour, which is 119.82 miles an hour, which is the Miss England 3. So he dwarfs Garwood's speed on water, and, you know, again, issues the challenge for the 1932 Harmsworth in Detroit. And so they're like, we're coming back for it, and this time we're going to win. So the Miss America. So one of the things we didn't talk about in the last week's show about the Miss America 10 was that this boat was so big, which we saw with this just an absolutely ridiculously large boat. I mean, this thing for a speedboat, it's just monstrous.
Huge.
And so anyways, one of the things though was that the horsepower behind this thing, you know, it ended up being 6,400 horsepower when it was done. So we said, once again, a comparison: Miss England 3, 4,000 horsepower. Miss America 10, 6,400. So like this is a next level. But it's in order to the problem is that you're using a wood boat.
Yeah.
So as we talked about in the very, I think the first episode is the goal was to get the boat out of the water onto its plane,
right,
which is a flat bottom on the back of the boat. The problem is that so they were like, well, wood would never take the punishment of this of the energy that this thing can take, that this thing's going through the water. Like it'll just strip the bottom of the boat off of it.
Right.
So they're like, so the only thing that they can do is make the plane made of metal. So the entire goal was to make the plane on the bottom of the boat made of metal, and to get it to plane so that it would ride on that plane when it was hitting that 126 or whatever miles an hour it was going to be hitting. So it had to ride on the plane. That was the entire thing. If it didn't ride on the plane, then it was, it was too much drag in the water. And so anyways, that's the goal. And also, of course, to keep those, keep the engines tethered as one. And so we also mentioned last week, the test driving, when they test drove, we did that when they test drove this thing, this thing is running, as far as fuel efficiency, it's sort of a modern day topic, fuel efficiency. This boat is running at, we talk about how many miles a gallon a car gets.
Yeah.
Well, this thing, you talk about how many gallons per mile, because this boat, it's taking 5 gallons a mile to push this thing, which is like, like this is the only vehicle I think I've ever heard of. It's about how many gallons per mile you get the other way around.
Yeah.
So anyways, that's where this thing is at. So, so anyways, so they take the boat out for a test run, and the boat. And I think we read that quote last week. The boat is not opened up at full throttle during the test run. So they're like, okay, hold on one second. Let me take a look at it. So we did. I think we did read that quote. So the boat. That's right. We did read the quote. So the boat is taken out for test run. We read that quote last week where they take it out and they're like, they're like, I think we left off in the end of the quote where he said, it'll do, he's like, they're like, hey, Gar, how did it run? He's like, it'll do. But one of the things we didn't talk about is that they didn't open it up to its max limits. They took it out for a test drive to make sure everything was functioning. And then, so then they took it out. And then what they found out was, 9 days prior to the race, which is after that first test run, they take the boat out and they say, let's max it out and see what it can do.
Yeah.
And so when they take it out 9 days prior to the race, they take it out and they push it up to its max capacity, and all the connecting rods and the engines all snap.
Oh, geez.
So the whole thing basically is just, it just limps back to shore. I don't even know I think they had to get towed back to shore. But so and this is 9 days prior to the race. So in true Garwood fashion,
rip it apart.
Rip it.
Let's rebuild this bad boy.
Worst. So I have my notes say
from the nuts and
yes,
bolts up.
Worst possible scenario is as all 4 engines had to be removed, torn apart, rebuilt with new custom rods in time for the boat to be tested again. Jesus. Right. So they have 9 days to do it. So worst possible scenario, because the engines have to be, the rods that connect them the engines have to be torn apart, new rods, custom rods, with a whole new type of metal or something or other put in there. So that's where we get to like sort of the first quote that I want to read. And again, the J. Lee Barrett quotes are so great. Usually for all the other subjects, we read little quotes here and there.
Yeah.
Some of these ones we've been reading are a little bit more extensive, but it's just because they're so good. He's one of the most amazing writers. And I said this before, the Speedboat Kings book, I've read a lot of history books, but the Speedboat Kings is one of my, it doesn't even matter what subject you're talking about. He's just one of the best. He puts you right there. And we've got a couple of really good quotes to read today. And this is the first one. And it talks about, once again, and we've talked about this before, some of the greatest parts of the story of Garwood are not necessarily the races themselves. The races are almost kind of like an anticlimax to a certain extent. It's the efforts that it takes just to get the boat in the water and in time for the race and ready to go. And then it's like the fact that the boats even finished the race is a huge thing compared to every other component he's ever had. Like all these opponents, their boats half the time don't even finish the race because the engineering is so flawed. And that's Detroit, man. They're building boats and products that actually make it around the track and finish the race, So anyways, So anyway, so now that all this takes us into the first, like I say, quote I want to read. J. Lee Baird, of course, and this is talking about the effort, all the things that went into, getting this boat ready 9 days prior to the race. And I'll tell you this. So we've got really two giant quotes to read, and all of the stuff we're about to read takes place. This is what's so interesting. It takes place within a 12-day span.
Okay.
12-day span. Okay. Keep that in mind. So anyway, so this is 9 days prior to the race. So right here, men of lesser metal would have surrendered the trophy to the English without a battle. Again, talking about the fact that the rod's broke in the boat and that they have to tear this thing apart. So I'm going to start over. Right here, men of lesser metal would have surrendered the trophy to the English without a battle. It didn't look like they could design and manufacture new connecting rods, practically rebuild 4 giant engines, hook the 2 banks together again in tandem, and set them back in the hull in 9 short days. But they did. For 6 days and 6 nights, Wood's men and the Packard engineers worked. For 6 days and 6 nights, they didn't get home for one meal. For 6 days and 6 nights, they caught what snatches of sleep they could beside the engines. They wouldn't quit. On the 3rd day before the race, the engines were ready. They were rushed back to Algonac. It was a full 2 days job to set them back into the hull. For 9 solid days, these men had worked, Wood and Johnson among them. No one but Wood's men and the Packard men knew about this. Few, very few, know it to this day. This isn't luck, it's work. Johnson and Vance Smith drove the Miss America 10 from Algonac across Lake St. Clair to Wood's Greyhaven home at Detroit the day before the race. Vance Smith was at the wheel, Johnson, as usual, at the throttles. A strong east wind was cutting diagonally across the bow of the boat, sifting the strong benzol gases into the cockpit of Johnson's side. About halfway across the lake, Vance turned to look at Johnson. His head and one arm were leaning over the side as though he were studying something there in the water. His left hand was clutching the throttle. Vance was anxious. Was there something wrong with the boat? Why didn't Johnson move? Vance tapped his riding mate on the shoulder. Still, Johnson didn't move. He was out, cold, unconscious from the sharp benzol gases that diagonal wind was sweeping to Johnson's side of the cockpit. Vance turned the 10th sharply to the left, headed the bow straight into the wind so that Johnson would get to the clean, fresh air on his side of the boat. Then Vance stood up in that bounding boat and worked on Johnson. He thought the man was dead. His body was limp, nerveless, senseless. For 10 minutes, Vance worked on his man out there alone in the middle of Lake St. Clair. Not another boat was in sight, and he worked fast. Come on, kid, he kept saying. They can't do without you in this race. Orland, for hell's sake, man, come on. Vance couldn't hear his own words over the roar of the engines, but he could see Johnson breathing. He knew the man was living, and he was getting air now. The gas is sweeping the other way. It was 10 minutes before Johnson spoke. He said, "What happened, Vance? Where are we?" Then he smiled. Guess I was out, huh? So this is the third time.
How many times has he almost died?
Near death.
Just driving this boat.
Yes. Throat slit in one
And
story.
there's no dead man. There's no dead man switch on this.
No.
He was out cold.
Yeah.
It's still full throttle.
Yeah. So one story,
God.
Orland gets his throat slit by a board, gets his jugular exposed, pronounced dead on the shore, makes it through it. Another story, the boat explodes in Italy, ends up flying up 100 yards into the air, landing on his face or something, and bring him onto the dock. They took him to this whole dramatic scene where they did take him by boat to the hospital and all this. Survives. Here he inhales benzol and is out for 10 minutes from fumes of benzol fumes. And here, benzol fumes. I don't even know what that is, but it sounds
It
so
can't be.
good.
You should not be breathing.
It's like huffing. I mean, and you're talking about these massive engines spewing it into your face.
God, yeah.
I mean, this is toxic stuff we're talking about here. And he's out for 10 minutes and somehow comes out of it. Like, I mean, that's what I'm saying. Like, this is the third time. This guy is a third time. He's like almost dead. So this is the lead up to this race. So following this, following this situation, what they realized during these test runs was that the metal plane on the bottom of the boat was not planing.
Oh, okay.
So the boat was, they ran a dozen tests like this, where they're driving across Lake St. Clair, testing the plane out, trying to get the boat up on its plane. And a dozen times they could not get this boat to plane, and they would take it back to the warehouse, readjust the plane, bow it back out on the river, 5 gallons a mile, and it didn't plane again. And they would take it back, rework the plane, take it back out on the river, when it still wouldn't plane. Okay. So they do this, and they say this in a J. Lee Barrett a dozen times. They try to fix the metal plane on the bottom of this boat, and a dozen times it fails. And so they ran out of time. They ran out of time. And so they're going into the race at 7. They never got it to plane going into the race against K-Don on the morning on this morning. So the morning of the race. So now the next quote we're going to begin with is the morning of the race. And this is like some of my favorite writing of J. Lee Barrett. Like we're literally leaving into like some of the greatest, some of the greatest writing he has to say. Yeah. So this is the morning of the race. And so the first quote we're going to read is J. Lee Barrett waking up and he's just describing what he sees on the river. Okay. Cause this is like, this race is so massively hyped. We talked about the last race being one of the largest, sporting events in human history. I think we made a pretty decent case a couple episodes ago for that race being, there was, over 500,000 people at that race. Yeah. We could easily make a case for, one of the largest sporting events in human history with that race. And now we're getting into this one, which is a rematch with even bigger stakes. And so this is J. Lee Barrett's sort of take on that. So here again, J. Lee Barrett, Speedboat Kings. The 1932 race for the trophy on Lake St. Clair was run at 7 o'clock in the morning. The officials agreed on the change. They felt that the water would be smoother at sunrise than at sundown. It wasn't, at least not for the first heat. Always in the background of my memory will hang the dim tapestry of these miserable hours before the race started. When I stepped out into that dark morning at 5 o'clock, I felt sure there would be no race, no spectators, nothing. A pitiless cold rain was driving down, and I knew that the course would be a sea of whitecaps. I felt like I was a lone figure of the night, standing thin and gaunt and cold against the black sky. I stepped into my car and drove down to the lake. I can't quite tell the feeling that swept through me at what I saw. Probably 1,000 stabbing, bobbing, disappearing lights out across the lake, moving in an almost endless string toward a common goal, the Harmsworth course. I knew what that meant, and I was amazed. They were the boats, canoes, rowboats, dinghies, cockleshells, sailboats, cruisers, yachts, runabouts, loaded to the gunwales with part of the race-mad crowds that throng to see these races every year. From a black wind-broken sky, the rains came, and through that dim night, the drenched pageant moved across an angry sea like a specter. I couldn't help but fear for the safety of those people. They'd never get out into the higher waters of the lake without a wholesale tragedy. And we, the officials, the members of the race committee, were responsible. We had changed the course to Lake St. Clair to avoid possible disaster. And here before my eyes were 1,000 crowded, storm-tossed boats converging upon the Harmsworth course from all directions. This possibly was a disaster of a more wholesale kind than we had ever dreamed. There wasn't anything we could do, not now, and yet I couldn't help feel a tiny catch in the throat. It was a ghastly testimony of the hold these races have on the popular mind. I was a little proud that I had a small hand in staging this giant spectacle. I don't know how it was done. It seems miraculous now that not one fatality occurred. But when dawn broke and this curtain went up for the first act of this Harmsworth drama in 1932, they were there, 1,000 boats anchored around the rim of the course, waiting. Many of them were so loaded down with their human cargoes that the dangerous deep water was even now licking over their gunwales. Not only that, when the first faint streaks of light began to pick their way out of the east, we saw the shoreline banked solid with humanity for miles. They had driven, walked, pedaled, and skated their way to the race through all that cold September rain. And they were there now, a black, solid mass, drenched to the skin, but waiting for the starting gun of another Harmsworth battle. What sporting event had ever seized on a people's fancy like this? It's just poetry.
It's
poetry.
I love this writing.
What sporting event in the world had ever seized on a people's fancy like this? Yeah. We're watching it through his eyes. Yeah. This massive humanity on boats, on the shore, on everywhere you can be. They're there to watch in the driving rain in the Michigan September around Lake St. Clair.
And then the wakes from the boat adding more trouble.
Yeah, well, he's worried about the fate of all these people. He's like, there's an immense human tragedy was befolding. And he's like, but there was like a sick fascination that I had something to do with the whole thing. he's like just honest and visualizing. He's telling us right through his eyes what
somebody's
he's
gonna
seeing.
die today.
He's like, and I was kind of perversely enjoying the fact that I had like something to do with this spectacle,
man.
no matter how it turns out, I had something to do with this,
Yeah.
It's just like he's just such a phenomenal writer, man. I mean, he's just a phenomenal, he paints a picture. Like the screenplay for this, and I didn't write a screenplay for the Garwood story, but like, what else do you need to describe the way the story is supposed to go, then like literally just to use J. Lee Barrett's words and narrative as the backdrop for the, setting the stage for the scenes. So anyway, so that's just the lead up to the race, right? So the next, so that, to kind of pick up with what, what we were saying, the main issue going into the race for Garwood was that a dozen times they tried to get this boat to plane. They've got a metal plane in the back. Everything depends on this boat planing because the boat can't take the pounding on the wood. The engine's too much.
If it does that dolphin thing,
you're done. It's going to chop up the boat. It's done. Exactly.
And you won't have the speed.
Mm-hmm.
You won't have the speed. And it'll probably rip the boat to shreds.
There you go. Exactly.
Those 4 engines will be at the bottom of Lake St.
And
Clair.
their boat might have more horsepower, but if the other boat has is skimming across the surface using all 4,000 of its horsepower, then you're done. So that's going to be like the main theme. So that's why I really want to drive that home is the issue is that there's 12 times going into this race. They're already on short schedule trying to rebuild all the engines. Right? They're already on a short schedule redoing all the engines, and they took it out a dozen times trying to get it to plane, and it never planed. So, so this is like setting the stage for like what in a movie would be like one of the greatest sort of endings. I mean, we have a whole nother episode to go, but this is what, like, you could leave it. You could almost leave it off at this story that we're about to read here as like the culmination, as a phenomenal culmination. So, leading into this, the boat's not planing. They're trying over and over. They've done all these things. They can't get it to go. So, the 1932 Harmsworth race, and again, out of J. Lee Barrett, Speedwell Kings. So Wood and Johnson went into the race with an unbalanced boat on a course trimmed with whitecaps in a driving rain. It was all they could do. The course was too rough for racing boats, but the English wanted to race, so the race was run. Don led Wood over the starting line while Johnson was busy repairing a broken gas pipe. They were 20 seconds late going across. Already, Don had a commanding lead, and Don kept the lead for 4 laps. Wood and Johnson could not gain. They didn't dare open up the throttles in a boat that was out of line. The high seas would break it in two. Besides, the rain, even at 60 miles an hour, hit them full in the face like bullets. Don was far, far in the lead. The crowd, the judges, everyone was ready to concede the race to Don. But something happened. Maybe it was this luck that has been riding in Wood's boats and his 2 teddy bears. Maybe it wasn't. I don't know. At any rate, Don was on his 4th lap between the two southerly buoys, about 2 miles in the lead. Then it happened. The 10th straightened out. The boat had suddenly, almost miraculously, sprung itself into line. It was planing beautifully. The jarring of the high seas had sprung her. Wood and Johnson were completely surprised. They started after Don, but something else happened. Just as Johnson pulled open the throttles, Wood was flooded with benzol. The fuel was spraying from a broken overflow pipe beside Wood. When Johnson saw what was happening, he cut down the throttle again. They couldn't go on like that. Johnson jumped up and made what carburetor adjustments he could in that bounding boat. Then he sat down again, holding the throttles down to about 50 miles an hour. And all this time, the rain was pelting down like lead bullets, and Wood's face and hands were burning like acid from the spraying benzol. Johnson didn't know what to do. He couldn't pull open the throttles. If he did, the engines were in danger of backfiring, and Wood would have been a human torch. But because the backfire pop-off valves were only 6 inches from Wood's knees. Wood knew that too. He knew if those engines ever backfired, as they often do when Johnson pulled open the throttles, he'd burn up like paper. In fact, the whole boat would have been blown to pieces. But there was Don, gaining on them every second. When Wood thought of Don, he acted. He gave Johnson the signal for open throttle. To hell with the benzol, he told himself. Give her the gun, Orland. Let's go. When Johnson got the signal, he thought Wood had gone mad. But he didn't hesitate. He didn't hesitate. He pulled open the throttles. The Miss America 10 spurted ahead like a rocket. Just as the boat leaped, Johnson caught the figure of the teddy bears flying past. The wire holding them to the engines had snapped. Johnson made a dive for them and just got his fingers on the flying wire in time. The teddy bears were saved. Wood said after the race, I could have kissed Johnson when he saved those teddy bears. The Miss America 10 was closing on Don swiftly. Don, meanwhile, didn't know what was happening. When he turned around suddenly and saw Wood only 200 yards behind him, he was surprised. Don controls his fuel with his right foot. By pressing forward, he feeds fuel to both engines. By shifting his foot to the right or left, he cuts down on either port to the starboard engine. Don jammed his foot down on the throttle to the starboard engine. The throttle control jerked loose. The port engine froze. Dick Garner, one of Don's mechanics, went aft and tried to hold the throttle connection. He was badly burned and had to be taken to the hospital immediately after the race. Don's port engine was crippled, but he tried gamely to keep ahead of Wood. Every time he'd press his foot control, the engine stacks would belch smoke and fire. Don's world record holder was limping badly, crippled, out of the race. Wood and Johnson passed Don at the beginning of the fifth and last lap. They stayed there in the lead. At the closing gun, they were over 2 miles ahead. After Don crossed the finish line, he immediately headed the bow of his boat toward Henry B. Joy Boatwell and started to call wildly for a tow. His boat was sinking. The stern was dangerously low in the water. Don and his mechanic stood upright on the bow of the boat, ready to jump into the lake, while Don kept calling for pails to bail his boat out. The Miss England 3 was docked, bailed out, and strung up in her cradle. Don and his men took off their riding clothes, dressed, and walked out. About 4 o'clock the next morning, the mechanics came back and started to touch up the engines. Meanwhile, I had gone over to Wood's home at Greyhaven, where Wood had taken his Miss America 10. Wood and his men were working in his yard that night under strong floodlights. His boat was strewn all over the yard. His engines were all as they would be. His boat was strewn all over the yard. His engines were all apart, and the men were measuring the pistons, the rings, everything. A few of the men were rebuilding the broken transom. It had ripped off in the race. They were building it sturdier this time. All this is routine with Wood and his men. All Saturday night, Sunday, and Sunday night, all Saturday night, Sunday, and Sunday night, they worked, checking every inch of those engines in the hull. Wood was making an aluminum visor to protect his and Johnson's face from the rain and the wind. Johnson was working on the carburetors. Lysee was checking over every possible strain in the hull. John Brewer, Frank Calveridge, Joseph Schaefer, Vance Smith, and M.J. Steele of Packard were there working fast, and Earl Twinning, too, of Champion Spark Plug Company. The second race was won before Wood put his Miss America 10 in the water again. It was won in Wood's yard under those floodlights. What happened in the second heat of the race? Don didn't get around one lap of the course. The broken piston tore through the cylinder wall with a deafening roar. The boat was disabled and towed off the lake. Wood and Johnson went on to finish the heat and keep the trophy. 500,000 Americans and Canadians were stunned. Here was an English boat that had traveled 120 miles an hour in England during the summer. It was the finest piece of engineering ever produced by British minds, and yet there it was, limping off the course after traveling scarcely 7 miles before these amazed throngs. They still said, these people, that Wood was lucky, but they didn't know the hell Wood and his men had gone through for the past 12 days. Isn't that fucking awesome? They're like, he was lucky. And they're like, really?
There's no luck.
Really?
There's no luck.
He tore engines
That's
apart.
grit.
Ben Orland Johnson nearly dies. They're
That's
bringing
grit.
every single thing they're doing is tearing, like they're building boats, tearing boats apart, working on a flight. They nonstop. They're like, some people said Garwood was lucky.
Oh,
Well, you're out of your mind. Luck sure, the teddy bears came in handy. I mean, it didn't hurt.
yeah.
But they made that's what I'm saying. Like this is, like I say, this is the founding of America. Like this is Americana. This is America. This is Detroit folklore. This is like this right here. Like if like anytime, we talk about the Motor City image, Henry Ford, these different things. This guy here. This is the Motor City. This is the motor. This is one of the greatest stories of the Motor City and the automotive, the mechanical, all this. This guy right here, this guy should have a statue in downtown Detroit.
Yeah. It's the grit.
Yes.
The determination and just
he should have a statue in downtown Detroit as a mainstream representative of the city of Detroit, of the perseverance of American industry. Like you have a person like a capitalist who made his own money, who took that money and turned it into a passion project in which he pushed the boundaries. We were talking to Roger last week about how what happened to the engines in the Miss America 10. They went into helping the U.S. war effort so they could build PT boat and landing boats for Normandy and that, they use the engines for making boats for the war effort, like whatever happened to the engines, we don't know, because the U.S. government used them to create as prototypes to use for the boats that, gave American advantage in World War II. That's Detroit.
Yes.
That's Garwood. These are these people that are like, this story of Garwood. When I first started this project, I didn't know anything. I'd never even heard the name Garwood. Never heard his name. And this I'm saying, I don't think it's because I'm like some kind of an idiot, right? It's because this is the stories that need to be taught and told and brought back to the modern day and celebrated at different events, mainstream events, even if it's a Tigers, Lions, Red Wings, whatever modern day stuff.
Garwood Day.
Yes.
Garwood Night.
Well, whatever it is, it needs to be brought out regardless of sport, regardless of things. These kind of stories are what shaped this city, what gave it the sort of, the prestige, the elan, the personality, the reputation that we have today began with these types, you see. And that's what I'm saying. Like this guy, he embodies it. Yeah. He embodies it. He radiates it. And that's what I'm saying. Like this is, it's like they said he's lucky. They still said, these people, that Wood was lucky, but they didn't know the hell Wood and his men had gone through for the past 12 days. They had no idea. Mm-hmm. So that's what I'm saying. Like and the people today have no idea, like like this story. This is a standalone movie by itself.
And really it's though it was standing there at that, at the stern of the boat, in those two little seats, and they are literally straddling the engines.
You can't even see over the front of the boat.
No, we tried seeing.
You can't even see.
We tried getting in.
You can see out in the distance ahead of you.
And they were looking at, they're like, he was like, don't get in the boat.
Yeah. But you can see in the distance. You could probably see a good, like maybe 100 yards. Yeah. You can see things 100 yards ahead of you in the Miss America 10.
But now when you're flying 90 miles.
Yeah, but you can't see within anything that's anywhere near proximity to that monster. You can't see anything. The front of that boat sticks up in the air. That thing is imagine if it's belting smoke and fumes and all this other stuff. They're just going on. It's just, it's an absolutely incredible.
And they are literally straddling that engine.
Yeah, and the engine is the whole boat is the engine. Yeah, like the whole engine is the boat. Like when you're looking at that thing, and with some of the
people talking about motorcycles being a crotch rocket, but this thing.
But look at the. We have a couple photos up on the screen. If you're if you're listening to it, take a look at some of these. Just even the pictures we have. Even look up Miss America 10 because these pictures are pretty well. These are from my book, but you can see these similar pictures on the internet. Available now. DetroitCityOfChampions.com. But these engines are just ridiculous.
Yeah.
They're ridiculous. And when you see the size of the boat and you see two little guys in the back of it, the guys look like little ants and they're in the back of some kind of a freighter or something. This boat is ridiculous.
Yeah.
So anyways, this is the boat. Could you imagine being on that shoreline, and maybe you hadn't been, anybody that lived in that area probably saw them warming up with this thing going, my God, look at that monster. Look at that boat they're testing out.
What the hell's that noise?
But imagine you're just there for the race. Imagine you're just there for the. Imagine you're just there for the first day. You're riding one of these boats. It's your first. You haven't been watching them train and stuff. But you see the boat that they're unleashing for this race. It's the Miss America 10.
Things don't move 100 miles an hour in these days.
Yeah, so they're looking at this, but imagine this the first time you see that boat coming out for this race, you're like, man, Garwood is crazy. Like, they look at that boat that they're driving, they're like, well, they're not going to let them beat them in that Rolls Royce engines. They're going to take them down with Packards. They just had to strap 4 of them together to get the thing done. So it's like I say, we're sort of drawn towards the next week. We're going to kind of wrap up the story with a big conclusion episode.
Yeah.
But this was this was by far the most dramatic, of the sort of final races, because after this, the English are going to be demoralized.
Sure.
What are this was their best effort. It's been year after year after year of them trying to beat Garwood with the best, the Seagrave died and They've got, Wakefield is spending ridiculous sums of money building boats. They're losing. They keep losing every year. They boat after boat. They have the best engines. They have the best, drivers. They have the best everything, and it's not working. So they're just basically after this, they're going to be demoralized. I mean, he's not losing the Harmsworth, like.
So it just put it in perspective. The cars, this is 1932. Most of the cars in 1932 could go like 35, 40 miles an hour. There's with a good tailwind and the right circumstances, you could crank it up to 55, maybe 65, right? But that's like controlled circumstances. And so generally speaking, cars are going about 35, 40 miles an hour top speed. And then all these people are down there watching these boats going 90, 100 miles an hour.
Well, so here's the thing. So I do want to point out one thing.
Nuts.
So here's the thing is that during this race, because of the rain, because of the circumstances.
Yeah.
So number one, Garwood wins his 7th consecutive Harmsworth, right?
Yeah.
And so the Miss America 10 during this race only averaged 78 miles an hour during the race because of all the elements. On average, So it led to the question, how fast is she really? Right.
Yeah.
Because Miss America, when Garwood set the world record, that's what I mentioned at the beginning.
Right.
In January, he'd used the Miss America 9 and they'd max out at 111.
Yeah.
And then the Miss England 3 beat Garwood with 119.82 miles an hour.
Yeah.
So now they got the Madman's dream out on the river.
What can Miss X do?
Yes.
With those engines?
And so they take this thing out there and it's 124.86 miles an hour. They take this thing out. Yes.
New record?
Yeah. Oh, 100. Absolutely. So they take this thing out Yes, see 124.86 miles an hour. So they crushed that record. Their record stands for I think 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody touched that record after that. So yeah, nobody challenged Garwood. Like you'd be crazy to challenge him at this point. So I've got one little last quote that I wanted to read that doesn't really fit into the total narrative.
All right, does that have something to do with those cartoons?
Exactly. We have a little cartoon image to show up on the screen.
Yeah.
And so one of the interesting sort of writers of the 1930s was a guy named Paul Gallico.
Okay.
And Paul Gallico,
the great.
Well, one of the things that kind of made him cool, and if you're an aspiring journalist, this might be of interest to you. One of the things that he did, which was really interesting, was he actually participated in some of the events that they covered.
Oh, participatory journalism.
Exactly.
That's George Plimpton.
Exactly. So the photo we have, it's what we have on
George Plimpton.
So like a George Plimpton, exactly that, where George Plimpton had papered line where he was played with the lines, the quarterback.
I got to interview him.
Exactly. Oh, did you really?
Yeah, we had him on. He wrote a book about the letters to Dr. Rolfe, and this veterinarian goes missing. And people are writing in, and the pets are writing in, asking questions about Dr. Rolfe. But he had the best voice.
Really?
It was I just sitting there listening to him. It was.
I remember watching them. I never read the book, but the paper line in the movie was just so cool.
Yeah.
It's
Alan Alda played.
Alan Alda, yeah.
So he did. He played. He practiced with the Lions,
and he was quarterback. Yeah, which is a tough job.
He played one down in the preseason.
Yeah,
game
but that's tough as it is.
Oh yeah,
I remember when Will Ferrell played. He got there's a spring training in baseball maybe 8 years ago, and he was quote unquote traded to 9 different teams in that same spring training, and they helicoptered into all these different spring trainings. And he actually played one inning of each for 9 different teams.
He was getting traded
at a different position.
Oh wow!
And so it was kind of so he played catcher. I don't think he played for a full inning each thing. It was one appearance, one pitch or something.
Yeah.
And so
that's so funny.
But I watched it live. I watched a couple of a couple. I think it was 2 of the different teams that I heard about it. I'm like, oh man! So I tuned in and started watching it. Yeah. And there was a moment where he was in left field. That's when I sort of tuned in, and you're like. You're watching an actor out on a field with major leaguers, and you can actually feel it through the screen. You're like, oh my God, is this guy going to be okay? Because you see the differential in talent when you see a guy kind of going out there this, and then you see, these stars are, you're talking about major leaguers. And so that's what I'm saying. For for George Plimpton to go out there as a quarterback, even for one, for however many they say one snap was it?
Yeah, well, he played.
I think he played a quarter or something.
Yeah,
that's intense. That's tough to do. You're playing with people that are at the very pinnacle of their professions and elite athletes. In every
so this
regard.
Gallico did something similar.
Exactly,
with
but he did
Garwood.
Exactly, not only with Garwood, but we have it up on the screen for this picture. It's a little cartoon image, and they're kind of hyping Gallico. It says. The cartoon image is kind of small on the screen, but it says Gallico the Great, America's top sports writer.
Okay.
And I'll kind of read a little.
It's much bigger in the book if you want to buy the book.
Yeah, it's much bigger in the book.
We do like these episodes, and they're all focused around your book, and we hardly ever plug the book.
Yeah,
and you're modest, and you don't plug the book.
Well, I don't even think about it honestly.
People should buy the book.
Well, here's the thing: is when I used to sell books, when I used to sell books at art shows, like. I wouldn't even I would just be telling stories of the City of Champions season.
And
I'd almost forget to even pitch the book.
Oh,
crap.
Like, all these stories are in this book.
Well, people would cut me off and be like, they're like, I'll take it. I'll be like, hold on a second. Forget about that for a second. Let me finish the story. Like, no, they're like, no, I gotta go. Let me get a couple.
Just give me the book. I'll read the rest.
Give me your book and I'll go. And I'm like, okay, sweet. All right. The next person come up. And then I'd start from the beginning, like, it'd start from the beginning. I'd tell the story 100 times a day, and I'd have to start from the beginning every single time.
Are you having fun doing this?
Oh, I love it.
Yeah.
The greatest thing about this show, besides hanging out with you, which I love hanging out with you, Jamie.
I'm having fun.
But I think what I love about this is being able to, when I used to do art shows, like I was just about to say there.
You got to start over.
I have to start the story. It was like Groundhog's Day, 1,000 times a day. Because every time a person would walk by, I'd have to start from the very beginning.
Well, it's Groundhog's Day.
Yeah, exactly. They're like,
we're gobblers now.
Because what sort of a representation of my day in a nutshell would be like somebody would look at my sign that said, "Did you know that the Tigers, Lions, Red Wings all won their first championship same season?"
Really? Did they really?
There you go. And I'd be like. Yes, they did.
As a matter of fact.
Yes, they did. And I'd be like, yes, in 1935, it's usually the first question they have is what year was it? Yes. And so, I'd get so many questions, at the same time, the same questions, I would be able to guess what they were going to be like. Let me guess what you're going to say next. That was kind of like my hook. And then I would just jump into telling the story, but it'd be over and over and over again, like hundreds of times a day. And so that's what I love doing the show because we get to dive into, I can point out a comic strip with Paul Gallico and talk about this guy for a second.
All right, we got way sidetracked, but Gallico.
Oh yeah, so they say right here in the little cartoon, it's kind of small on the screen, but sports writing from Paul Gallico tried everything from a crack in the jaw by Dempsey to catching Dizzy Dean's fastball, just to tell his readers what it felt like. So in the little cartoon strip, there's 5 different sort of main images. It said. The KO did not bother Gallico. In the next few years, he persuaded the stars in all sports to give him a crack. He caught the famous fastball of Dizzy Dean, star pitcher for the St. Louis Cardinals. And then there's a picture of him in a business suit, in a suit, catching a football from a guy in a leather helmet. It says he caught the bullet-like pass of Benny Friedman, University of Michigan football star, who went on to play for the New York Giants. And then he raced Johnny Weissmuller in a pool. So he's swimming. Come on, Gallico, you slowpoke. He's getting, he's losing to
my doggy paddling.
He's losing to Johnny Weissmuller, who at the was first Tarzan. It says, and then it says, he raced Cliff Berger's racing car, and he's in this he's behind the wheel of this race car with a fin on the back. And then it said Garwood gave Paul a crack at his speedboat. And so I actually have a quote. In J-Lee Barrett, our go-to. So talking about the experience Paul Gallico had, this is not in the cartoon image. That's what I'm saying. I connected this cartoon I found with a quote from J-Lee Barrett talking about the time that Paul Gallico went for a ride with Garwood in the Miss America 10. So this is again J-Lee Barrett, Speedboat Kings. Wood took Paul Gallico, famous sports writer, for a ride in the Miss America 10. When they came back to the boat well, Wood turned to Gallico and said, "Well, Paul, how was the ride?" Gallico swept the riding helmet from his head and answered nervously, "It's like riding to Mars on the tail of a comet." Right? So that's Paul Gallico there. And then I have another quick
it's faster than anything happening.
Yeah,
cars are maxing out at 50 miles an hour. They're rocking it. And on the water, I mean, because 50 miles an hour on the highway feels like something. 50 miles an hour on the water feels like something else entirely. And when the highest speed ever, your highest speeds on the road generally are like 35 miles an hour. That's got to be insane.
Well, it's like
that's got to be
it's like
riding to Mars in the tail of a comet.
It's like that video that our buddy Chris shared with us with the video with Charles Mistely pushing the Miss America 9.
Yeah, and the reporter in there and his face just
and they're like, this
away.
Is crazy. Yeah,
and that's just a Sunday ride.
Yeah, exactly. Where he's like, they're like, this is speed. They're ripping on the river. And so I actually have another quote here and this is again in Speedboat Kings by J. Lee Barrett, where he asked Orland Johnson about the experience. So J. Lee Barrett says, I asked Orland Johnson one day what it feels like to ride in these fast boats. Well, he said, someday take the springs and tires off your automobile. Take the car over to the nearest railroad track and put it across the ties at 50 miles an hour. That's what it feels like. So ripping down the railroad tracks at 50 miles an hour
hurts.
Yeah, they take a beating. This is not, for the faint of heart.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's my last little bit. I just wanted to share about the what it felt like to ride the Miss America 10 because the thing about it is that you saw one of the things we mentioned here in this was that they took it out. It took them a dozen times just to try to get it to plane.
Yeah.
And then it only planed after they were pushing it on the race and by a miracle it planed or whatever. So modern day people, if the Miss America 10 were ever to be seaworthy again,
yeah,
would it ever be able to plane like they were able, it took the best mechanics, like the sun, like the sun shining down on this one incredible moment to get the Miss America 10 up on her plane.
Yeah.
Their laps were covered in benzol and they said full throttle. We're risking our lives regardless. That's what it took to get that boat. And that's why it makes such a great movie moment is that it planed. Like how many times did this boat, we have one more race to talk about.
Yeah.
But the number of times that boat actually planed the way it was supposed to was such a fleeting moment and just the most the pinnacle of this golden era of the development of speed on water. Like that's the moment where that boat is planing through this miracle. So would we ever, if we even put the Miss America, the Miss America 9's cool to roll around in the river with, they have modern day engines pushing it and they're able to drive it around. But the Miss America 10 is a totally different animal.
Yeah.
Getting that boat back in the river and getting that thing, you might be able to, if you had enough money, you get the engines back in, you could probably drive it around. But getting that beast, the Madman's dream to 126 mile an hour up on her plane.
Yeah.
I just don't see the dedication it takes to do that. I just don't think that would ever, it would just be kind of a miracle to make it happen like that.
That is just bloody dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
I love these stories, man.
I know.
I just,
that's what I'm saying. This is why it's my favorite stories, though. I mean, it's my favorite.
Working my way through this.
Yeah, me too. That's what I'm saying. Of all the stars, we're gonna get to it, next week a little bit about just how big Garwood was. That's sort of the conclusion I wanted to bring out next week was.
Well, the last two races, the numbers of people that came out to these races,
the biggest events in human history,
phenomenal.
Yes, we already walked. We a few episodes ago we went down the list of the biggest sporting events of all time.
Yeah.
And this is as big or bigger or any of them. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. It's so, and it never gets mentioned. And it never gets mentioned, of course.
No,
it's never even mentioned as even a possibility of being in that category.
Detroit.
Because it's a forgotten component of, all of this stuff is forgotten. The whole story's forgotten. They forget the fact that the baseline fact that the three teams won their first championships in the same season. Yeah. So why would they remember the fact that the Garwood races were the biggest races in human history?
New England came close. They were talking all about
times,
it.
Yeah.
Nope. Florida came close that one season. Nope.
Boston got close. They got to Game 7 of the Stanley Cup championship.
Yeah.
If they would have won, they would have won all three. And the Boston Globe writer called me one day.
Okay.
And he was like, "Can we get a quote in case that Boston wins 3 championships in the same season?" I'm like,
"Here's my quote."
I was like,
"Ain't gonna happen."
No, I didn't say that, but I was like, well, I told him, I said,
what did you say?
Well, I just told him, I said, I'm like, well, if you do, it's a major accomplishment because nobody's done it since.
Right.
The last time, the nearest attempt previously to Boston getting into Game 7 of the Stanley Cup was just a couple of years ago. Was when the Patriots went 18-0.
Yeah.
They won every single game. They were the last team that had to win it. You had Tom Brady in the Super Bowl.
Right.
18-0. and they were going to win the Super Bowl, and they lost the Super Bowl after going 18-0 and didn't go. And that was the year I was about to publish my first book. And so I was like, and I told the guy, I was like, I mean, if you do it, that's a big deal. I'm like, I said the coolest thing. I'm like, we
got to get Tom Brady on here.
Well, I even told the writer, I said, I'm not even rooting against you because any reason to get this story out.
Yeah.
Because if the Boston had done it, at the very least, they would have been saying no city has done it since 1935. And maybe that would have triggered a couple people to look into this story. You know what I mean? Like, oh, Detroit did it in 35. I never knew that.
I could sell a couple more copies and don't have to eat Swanson dinners.
Well, I'm not. That was
we can up that to Stofers.
Well, I'm not. I wasn't even thinking about that. No, you don't
even
even think about that. I'm thinking about just the visibility of this story.
I'm busting your
No, I know you are. But I'm saying but it's the visibility of the story about no matter, like for the last 12 years of trying to get this story out, there's nobody, it's the Detroit media, the teams, they act like this it either never happened or it's just some random rantings of a madman. And
Charles, I think we got a nice package here. And I think you've collected. I can't take any credit for this.
Yeah, but you're helping. But here's the thing is that
I'm just sitting here enjoying you telling me.
Story. But the City of Champions story. I've said this from the very beginning. I put this. I was
I'm
lucky enough to be able to put all this. Yeah, but Jamie, you're part of the story. Everybody that's listening is part of the story. This story doesn't. I've said this from the beginning. It doesn't belong to me. Like my role in this entire story was to because there's all these, anybody that's ever heard about this or there's always these Detroit won a bunch of championships in 1935 or, Joe Louis was big or, the Tigers did this. There's all these kind of mythology. If you heard anything at all,
right.
You heard mythology. My role in this was to lay down the facts into a concrete, to lay down, to combine all the factual components of this and to separate fact from fiction and say, this is what happened. Make my cases, especially in the book, as ironclad as I could make it so that I could lay down the foundation and say, this is what actually happened. Right. And then based upon
just
this,
it was before World War II, please don't discredit it.
Well, yeah, but as a historian, that was my role, was to lay down the facts and say, this is what actually happened. And then whatever happens after this, I've been from the very beginning, I have been opening this thing up to anyone who wanted to join in, because like I say, my role is as a historian and to say, this is what happened. Now let's celebrate it. The city, the teams, anybody that wanted to be a part of this. I could have copyrighted some of this stuff, like the City of Champions concept and all this different stuff.
Right.
I could have trademarked half this stuff. And I didn't do any of that because I didn't want to. I wanted other people to be able to take the how great this was and roll with it in their own way. You know what I mean? And you're, like I say, you are a part of this story, Jamie. We are broadcasting
because I'm enjoying the hell out of it.
Good. But I'm saying, you are a major part of this. Anybody that's listening to this at home,
because I do, I want to see this. I want to see this go. I want to see that. I would love to see this Garwood. I got a couple of people. I'm going to make them listen to this podcast. Turn this into something for me.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying.
But it's the people that are listening and following along and joining us for the party. We appreciate
everybody
it.
else here.
Chris got here today.
Chris is a major component of the City of Champions. He helped start the Wikipedia page for Champions. I mean, that helped. Chris is the one that did all the tech work for the City of Champions Wikipedia page. Which has grown massively. You know,
so and he checked in again today.
Good,
and then
but I'm just saying,
Jesse checked in, so we want to thank Jesse.
Absolutely. What's up, Jesse?
And then, but everybody who's listening, subscribe, all the podcast stuff.
But everybody's. My point is, the main thing is that this is not my story.
Right.
I have the books out. Yes. And maybe one of the reasons I don't pitch the books all the time is I don't even feel like this is my story. I do feel, however, that I'm a protector of it.
Mm-hmm.
I protect it. I do not let, I've had a couple of people along the way that wanted to turn this into, to do things with it and take it different directions. And I'm like, that's why I wrote the screenplay. I didn't write the screenplay because I felt like I'm going to have to be the best screenwriter in Hollywood. I never thought about that at all. My main role is that if I wrote the screenplay, and I took the best components of this story, like all the components. I take the true story of this and convert it into a screenplay. Then what it does is it protects the story from anybody that comes along like a fly by night and goes, "Oh, the City of Champions, that'd be a great story," and then they turn it into some crap film. And they use some, you know, a couple of basic components and turn it into a crap film.
Right.
I wrote the screenplay to protect the story so that if anybody comes along, that if they're going to use the main components, especially out of my book, which is what I use for the screenplay, that they're infringing on my trademark, my copyright of the screenplay, my idea, and I thus protect it. So I do consider myself a protector of the truth of this story.
The story is so good as it is.
It doesn't need to be changed. It doesn't need to be Hollywoodized.
It doesn't need that Hollywood spin. It doesn't need. There's enough drama. There's
all
enough. There's enough conflict. There's enough
all
drama.
Of it.
You know, Joe Lewis.
All
just,
of it.
How much conflict can you get into one human being?
Exactly.
And the things he had to face and overcome and do. And Garwood, the grit, the
every single race they got to tear it apart. You know, like they're like, tear it apart, boys. We got to tear it apart.
It's like the never say die that. We got to do it harder,
and
faster,
all of
better.
this stuff is happening at the same time. Like that's what's so incredible.
With 18 months, right?
Yeah. Well, this was 32 with Garwood. Again, we're gonna
right.
You know, spoiler alert, but Garwood didn't even race in 35. But there was. We'll get to that. Next
he was
week,
so revered.
He was challenged in 35, but nobody had. But when he started talking about doing a Miss America 11, they backed off in 1935. So he walked in, but that's what we're going to talk about a little bit about next week. Was just the impact of Garwood in his day. Is that when Garwood, like I've got this fantastic picture we're going to show next week. In fact, I put it in my notes to make sure that we show the image next week. When the Tigers won the World Series, their victory party. Garwood was like the guest of honor.
Right.
The fact that Garwood showed up at the Tigers victory party for the World Series was like the honor of the Tigers, that he would make himself available for their party. They won the first World Series in Detroit history, and Garwood was there. You know, like he was absolutely revered. He was a Babe Ruthian figure in his day.
Yeah. And
that's what we're trying to bring out. Like, speedboat racing, like, you know, it's the, you know, in the public consciousness is somewhat declined, of course. I mean, not somewhat, a lot.
Yeah.
But in his day, he was a star he was a superstar amongst stars. You know, he was the guy. He was one of the most famous people in the world, and he was a Detroiter. He was the one that brought, you know, he brought glory. And especially in 32, the years we're talking about here.
Yeah.
There was nothing else. The Tigers were garbage.
No.
The Red Wings were in the middle of their second team name. In fact, it became the Red Wings in between 32 and 33.
Yeah.
I mean, they would just become known as Red Wings. The Lions didn't even exist.
Yeah.
There was nothing there. Garwood was Detroit sports, and he was a Ruthian figure.
Right.
So, anyways, yeah. So,
all right. Like, subscribe, leave a comment. We're gonna do more. We got one
more episode on Garwood, and then we're going into Walter Hagen.
Oh my God!
Wait till we go into Walter Hagen's a great story too.
Gotta tee it up.
Oh, Walter Hagen's a great story. We're gonna be talking golf history.
I love it.
Pro golf history. What Walter Hagen was pro. There, like the story of pro golf history.
Yeah,
is Walter Hagen. He is his. So we're gonna be getting into.
We're gonna see. If
that's a couple episodes away. But we're
see if we get Bob Krause in here to join us for some golf.
We'll talk. Yeah, we'll talk.
All right. So there you go. Like, subscribe, leave a comment. Thank you for joining us. It is Detroit City of Champions, wherever you're on the Facebook, YouTube, any audio listening device. Just follow along. Thank you. Tell a couple friends. And Charles, thank you.
My pleasure, Jamie. Thank you, man, for all the work you do too. Like I say, do not diminish your role in the City of Champions story. We're all part of this. We're trying to bring this story back. You are just as much a part of it as I am. I do not. I say, my role is the facts and figures.
I'm having fun.
You do well, dude. The broadcasting
story time for me.
You do a ton of work behind the scenes, and I am absolutely grateful for all the work you do.
All good,
just even to be able to get it to the listener. There's a ton of work for you that are listening on. There's a ton of work that goes on behind the scenes. And Jamie does like 99% of it. I do the little bios on it. I send Jamie the bio. He uploads it.
It's teamwork. It is teamwork.
That's what I'm saying. You're as much a part of this as anything, Jamie. You built the studios. You get this thing going. So don't don't ever diminish by any means role. We all are. If anybody that loves this story and wants this thing to come back, everyone that joins in, no matter what component they fill, it's a group effort. You know what I mean? It's a group effort towards bringing it all out. So,
all right. Thanks, everybody. Chris listening in, everybody around with us. We'll see you next time. It's Detroit City of Champions, the podcast.